If I had been able to be on the BBC or other mainstream news, I would have explained the fact that we lost our sovereignty in 1973. We lost control of our fishing industry in 1973. There's a very infamous quote in regard to Ted Heath when someone who was the then Prime Minister, who then said, who was a dear friend of Jean Monnet, one of the architects, who then said, you know, how many people in the fishing industry? And someone said 18,000. He said, that's an insignificant vote.
This episode of the Sharpening Report. I'm your host, Sam Johnston. We're on YouTube, iTunes, Spreaker, and you can follow me at Twitter at Sam T. Johnston. Well, today we're going to talk about a passion of mine, and we're going to talk about a passion of our guests as well. It is taking a different route to talk about current events, but it is such an important avenue that many people don't seem to go down. We always talk about how Hollywood's infiltrated and how they're spreading bad messages through different movies, but rarely are we able to talk to a producer of film that is actually producing eye-opening content, and that's who we are talking to. We're talking to Mark Sutherland from over in London, across the pond. Mark, how are you doing today?
I'm very well, Sam, and thank you very much for inviting me on your program. It's very kind of you.
Yes, I am glad to have you. So before we dive too much into your work in film, can you just talk about your background, who you are, where you came from, and how did you wake up to what's going on?
One day I landed from a spaceship. No, I didn't.
That fit in with Hollywood then, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. So my background, I was an apprentice cabinet maker, making furniture when I was 16. As a mature student, I then went and studied to be a teacher. I've had 13 years in sort of what we would call secondary education, from teaching from 11-year-olds to 18-year-olds. Spent 13 years full and part-time doing that. Ended up spending working in a pupil referral unit for expelled children. So I have an education background. I worked on my first low-budget feature film in 1992, which I designed, I built the set for, and that ended up in 35 cinemas in this country, called White Angel. It'd be quite funny if people started Googling that. So we made that, and friends of mine wrote the Gorilla's Guide to Filmmaking books. I then discovered a passion for working in film and television at that time, but then went into teaching and combined the two. Gave up teaching 2003, and then have been fairly full-time in TV and film. And when I'm not doing that, I'm then working in people's houses and refurbishment, as I am a carpenter. So the advice is, have multiple different ways to earn a living, if I'm saying that to any young person or young filmmakers. So that's sort of practical side of me. And then since 2015, I then found myself on Revelation Television over here, and I have the privilege to be able to talk to people like you on your side of the pond, and of course the wonderful Mike Kerr from Hear the Watchman, and then other platforms as well that have evolved. So I do interviews and talking about politically what's happening on this side of the pond. But like you, I am extremely passionate over the fact that how can we then incorporate our film and passion for the creative arts in getting our message over, particularly in regard to the end times, how we view what's happening, things from a Christian point of view, and trying to make it not watering down our message, but trying to make it relevant, trying to get people to access and get them to be awake about what is going on. Hence some of the stuff I've made, some of the stuff that I want to make. So that's what I do. So I've done a number of different things. So I art directed a big thing a number of years ago, one of the big things that BBC do, which is comic relief, etc. Found myself then working in various ways for various production companies, various channels, from carpenter to working on props and stuff. And then, of course, I have, according to my IMBD, which is true, no lies, I have produced a number of short films. I co-produced a feature film in 2010 called Sus, about the Sus laws, stop and search over here, which is from a very famous play. I designed that as well. So I do a lot of things, but I'm really, really passionate about making my own stuff, which at times is profoundly difficult, profoundly challenging, because it is always about that number one subject, which is money. How do we creatively go about it? How do we put all these incredible, talented people in the room? So that's me, and I'm extrember passionate about making films or working in the industry when I can. So a number of years ago, I worked as a carpenter on Jack Black's Gulliver's Travels at Pinewood and all that sort of thing. So it goes. I'm throwing that in because the skills go across the board from a practical point of view as well, Sam. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate that so much. You know, when I to introduce a creative aspect into the world that we live in, to try to show more people the truth, you know, something I'm really starting to wrestle with the Sharpening Report is I want to be more creative, and there's a million podcasts out there all doing the same thing, and I've kind of fallen into that line of doing the same thing. So I want to step out and, you know, do something different. So I appreciate that so much, and that mentality. And one of your bigger short films is called Of Lambs and Lions. And so can you talk about your inspiration behind that? I would urge everyone right now to stop this interview, go search it on YouTube. It's, you know, you just search Of Lambs and Lions, Mark Sutherland.
Between Lambs and Lions.
I'm sorry.
Between Lambs and Lions. No, don't worry. Between Lambs and Lions on YouTube.
Definitely go search that. Go watch it right now. It is very prevalent to what we're going through today. It has some really important themes. So stop this interview right now. Go take a watch. It's about 10 and a half minutes long, almost 11 minutes. It's really well done. Go watch that now and then come back. All right, now that you're back, that's great. So what's your inspiration behind that film, and what caused you to create that?
Very interesting, isn't it? I suppose the big thing, having got it here, I read this book, which is the Pamela Geller with Robert Spencer, which, just as an aside, are actually banned from coming into the UK. So let's just say that now. So this book is the Post-American Presidency about Barack Hussein Obama, written by Robert Spencer and Pamela Geller. So I read that book. And just after that, there was a film competition which someone had entered. I was trying to enter, looking at the Book of Daniel. And our theme of the film is the Book of Daniel. So we take the Book of Daniel from the Old Testament and put it within the political machinations in Washington politics. So a young filmmaker had entered the competition, wrote this idea, and I just phoned him up and said, we need to make a short film of this. There is a feature film script. I think he thought when I said we need to do it, I think he thought I was joking, and I wasn't, because we now have a finished product. So why did I show you that book? I showed you that book because I'm very, very passionate about about your politics and what's happening on your side of the pond. Because whatever people think, the President of the United States is seen as leader of the free world. Now it'd be great to open up that theme in the context of all the different political machinations that are going on your side of the pond and going on this side of the pond. And one of the things that I am profoundly passionate about is the fact that there is a parallel, even though people can't see it. At times we're beginning to see it. So Between Lambs and Lions was my way, my honest contribution to try and help to wake up people in the great nation of the United States of America leading up to the 2016 election. That may seem like hyperbole. That may seem like, I'm really talking out of my backside and trying to, really sort of big this up. But genuinely, that's how I felt. And as a Bible-believing Christian, I felt called to do that. That's why. So with showing that book and what's happened is a way that God leads. And you look back and you think, yeah, I was supposed to go on a really, really bad family holiday and escape from the the sort of hotel complex and run to the beach and read that book, which is actually what happened. And when I read the book, I just went, you're kidding, you're kidding, you're kidding. And then went on to make Between Lambs and Lions. We loaded it up, Sam, just before July the 4th, 2015. And it's very nice of you to say that the themes in it are relevant now, because you're absolutely right. The themes in it are totally relevant now, if not beginning to, it seems as though they're being even more so. And I could never have said that at that time. And what is fantastic is anyone who makes a piece of art to know that it's got longevity. You know, it has got, continues to have legs. And yes, there is a feature film, and if someone had $4 million, $5 million, we're going to go and make this tomorrow. And there are other things going on, and, you know, we're all chasing that. And we'll come to Hollywood. It'd be good to sort of make an address of Hollywood and completely finish any links of having any links with Hollywood. And we have to say, why not, with the den of iniquity and all the goings on that come out of it. So Between Lambs and Lions, it then was launched on the 4th of July. And just in June was when, as he was then, Donald J. Trump came down that escalator with Melania and announced that he was going to be running for the presidency of the United States of America. And everyone just thought this was an absolute joke. Well, we now know what happened in 2016. And my reflection is the fact that the 44th president, as we are now even more so beginning to see, and with the basically sleight of hand, do we know who he is? No. Are there questions of history? Yes, there is. Is he in one sense? No, he didn't believe in America. Hence why the book, The Post-American Presidency. I'm not making things up. We're starting to see this. And one of the reasons why we're starting to see this is in regard to the Mueller report and the fact that, you know, Rudy Giuliani on Fox 2 days ago, or maybe Friday, turned around and says about the Clintons, you know, the Clinton crime family. You know, we've heard of the 35,000 emails that have been destroyed, the laptops that have been smashed up, the Blackberries that have been smashed up, etc., etc. We've seen the scandals of, say, from Benghazi to the weaponizing the IRS to go after conservatives, to Fast and Furious. We've seen those and more. And also, you know, let's pass this and then we can see what's in it in regard to Obamacare. I'm not saying these things to show off and have a list, and I don't have a list. I'm just saying these because I'm passionate about your nation. I care for it greatly, and I have a lot of dear friends on your side of the pond, and I care politically. Because what's now being unfolding in regard to the Mueller report, which has found the President of the United States, quite rightly, all that we knew, many of us knew. And Mueller knew after 5 or 6 months, as Mark Levin said recently in an interview with Byron York, and other people have said this as well. Like Kevin Schiff has said this, that they all knew, but there was this conspiring to create this falseness, this false narrative to actually, in regard to this attempted coup of the United States. And that's where, again, when you've said about Between Lambs and Lions and the links, where, you know, in our little film, we take the Daniel as Daniel out of the Bible, Daniel Alesso, and he then, the Constitution of America has been suspended and there's complete overreach by the executive branch. You, in reality, without being dramatic, without making this up, that's how close you were. You were that close under the 44th president of the United States. And then they thought that by Hillary capturing the Democratic Party, by owning the Democratic Party, by fiddling the primary, by, you know, Bernie Sanders going, I now bow out, it's over to you, by all of this behavior going on, thought that she was going to basically walk into the White House. It was going to be a cakewalk. She didn't realize that Donald J. Trump was going to stop that. So in the sense, our film, Daniel, I would put a link between, and you tell me if you think I'm wrong, between him and Donald J. Trump in the fact that he decides to run for the presidency. And of course, Donald J. Trump did that, and then he became the 45th president of the United States, becomes president-elect November 2016. And I come back to this, that at the end of the day, the president of the United States is seen as leader of the free world, and we look at what had happened under the 44th president of the United States. And for me to even say this within certain circles over here, within the liberal elite and stupidityness that goes on in London and other parts of this country, that doesn't go down very well, because they've actually swallowed the whole sort of cultural Marxist socialist agenda. And what is quite fascinating to some, for me, is that in the past, my own particular politics have very much been left of centre. And I have moved across where now, in many ways, for many of us, where our politics would be deemed as right of centre, because the left have moved so far to the left, then in communists, then we will be seen to them as extreme right, which we are definitely not. And your Democratic Party in your country are Marxist. All the runners that are running for the Democratic Party on your side of the pond, they are, to me, they're just Marxists, total communists in what's going on, where they want to have, in our little film, the Constitution has been suspended. The Constitution is a written document. It's not living and breathing. It is a written document that was finalized in 1787. I'm not wanting to have a civics lesson, but on the other hand, it's really important that we have a civics lesson. As Richard Dreyfuss, the actor in Hollywood, has an organization to say we need to get civics back into the American education system, because since the 70s it hasn't been really taught for you to then fully understand the fact that it is not a living and breathing document. It is fixed. How that came about, how all the different amendments have come about, because at the moment the Democrats want to get rid of that. They then want to get rid of your guns and the First Amendment, in regard to free speech. The Second Amendment saying you have a right to bear arms against a tyrannical government. That is what it is there for. And what they want to then do is to completely undermine the Judeo-Christian heritage of your nation. We have the same here in various different ways in what's going on. That's why there is the parallel. So in our film, President Nebuchadnezzar, total absolute power. And as Obama said, I have a phone and I have a pen, in regard to the amount of executive decisions that he could make, executive legislation that could go through. I'm very grateful for you asking me that, Sam, and asking me that question. And I'll say why. I suppose because in some ways it's the first time in a long time being able to actually say that and link all that through and link. There are the parallels of the film. Now, other people that maybe work on it would be profoundly disgusted that I've even said that, but they'll have to get over it and understand and get over the fact that we are allowed to have different views that do not follow the socialist Marxist construct. And that's why I produced it. The graphics at the beginning of the film are deliberate because, as you know, what you are trying to do is to paint the world in regard to the film. And you're trying to make an introduction in a very short period, a very short space of time. And in 10.5 minutes, there is only so much that you can then do. So giving that introduction of the graphics, explaining what has been going on in the world in regard to how money is manipulated, in regard to the Twin Towers, in regard to the endless wars and all the rest. We are now waking up to that. In regard to the fact that Eisenhower talked about the military industrial complex. the fact that we have seen all these wars, the fact that we're then, in regard to the sad execution of JFK as president of the United States in 1963, and the fact that information doesn't come out, or it does come out, and we'll just wait and see what's going to happen over the next year in that regard, because I think President Trump is threatening things like that, which is to release even more information about various events. So we paint that world, including, which I find is amazing to actually say this, in it you've got a crowd there, and we have a graphic. I put a graphic of 1984 on. That's a picture that was influenced by what was happening in Ukraine in 2014. It's just hit me how Ukraine is coming up again because of Mr. Biden going, I want to run to be president of the United States, and Biden's son, Hunter, being involved in various nefarious dealings in regard to Ukraine, and his dad turning around and celebrating the fact that he had got a Ukrainian judge sacked, and that Ukrainian judge was going to be looking at what Hunter Biden was up to in regard to this energy company. Wow, I would never have thought of that in regard to putting that graphic in the film, and you very graciously have said it, all the relevant now and what is actually going on. So there are some parallels, and putting in, deliberately all the music, stock footage at the end of the film to draw it to Washington in a package. And whenever, and I appreciate your compliments, and also when other people, particularly Americans, say it, where they think, wow, was that made in the UK? Yes, it was made in the UK. So as I say, summing up in that sense, it was my small contribution to trying to draw attention to what was happening in 2016. And we'll go on to talk about it. We had the Brexit referendum, and then President Trump was elected in November.
Yeah, definitely. And we will get to Brexit in a second. I do want to touch on a couple more pieces of your film before we go into that. And one thing that, in that opening graphics, like you talked about, one thing that really stood out to me was the smearing of the leadership of the Truth Movement, and then the leadership of the Truth Movement going away. Like they were no longer a part of the picture anymore, and so the people gave away more power to the Republic, is what you call the New World Order in the film. And so, like, to see us at the very early stages of that in regards to the internet Truth Movement is very interesting.
It's well, and thank you again for saying that, because I'd forgotten about that. I'd forgotten that there's a sort of a Ron Paul lookalike in that sense there, and all that stuff that gone on. Actually, there's even a Mitt Romney lookalike, which is rather interesting, as the character of in that graphic of President Nebuchadnezzar, played by my dear friend Patson Joseph, who's in a sci-fi ABC show on your side of the pond. So, that's a very, very interesting thing, because do you know what? Afterwards, when my dear friend Nick, who did all the graphics for that, and I was suggesting things. I said, right, could we have this? We need this kind of picture for that. It didn't even sort of register with me. In fact, I'd even say, looking back now, I think that's quite a God moment in the fact of getting certain things drawn and coming up. And actually now and again in us chatting, I then realize again how much these seeds were sown, and that now it's being revealed, the importance of that. And you picked up on that, because some of that, there's Abby, just trying to think of, there's a particular newswoman who was on Russia Today. One of the characters is based on her, and Abby, and I can't think of her surname at the moment. So yeah, it's looking at all that different outside the mainstream truther movement, which I have become very reliant on, and so has yourself.
Yeah, definitely. And another really interesting quote. I'm not going to quote it perfectly, but it is in the discussion in the first scene, talking about the the man Daniel, who's talking about how he's not going to fight any sort of executive order, and because he just wants peace. And so if he doesn't fight, then there's peace. And that mentality we see so clearly in so many people who want to remain asleep to what's going on. And it's such a frustrating thing. It's like, nah, I'm not going to look into that because I don't want to know that, because I want to maintain this peace. And then they even can tie it to things like, into scripture and say, God is a God of peace, and that's what he wants for us. And that's what we're searching for, is peace. And it's like, not really, that's not what you're searching for. But that mentality to have your character go through in such a short 10-minute film, it's really interesting to have that mentality and then realize, no, I need to actually stand up against what's going on. And that, to me, is something that people are wrestling with every day. Is, I don't really want to know. I don't really want to look into that. I want to maintain this peace in this world without because they're afraid to lose it.
And you've asked a very, very deep question that really touches a nerve with me, very personally. Yeah, you're right. Now, my own understanding of this, if you take the American Revolution of 1776, and if I get this wrong, then please don't send all the Exocet missiles in now. But my own understanding of that is maybe that only 3 or 4% of the actual population actually fought. They actually fought for independence. So that means, where were the rest? Maybe, of course, certain people couldn't, but where were the rest? How much of a participation in it was there? And again, and here's the other thing, as Christians, and my dear friend Mike Spaulding wrote a book called Make Pulpits Great Again, right? A play on that, on the Make America Great Again. And he asked me to write a little comment at the beginning, and I did, and I was reminded of this story, which was the regiment that the British most feared in the American War of Independence was the Black and White. And the Black and White regiment were the pastors that preached in the pulpits, and that is the uniform that they were wearing. So that, to some extent, is a little bit different to what we have today, where people in these big mega churches, 5013C and all this kind of accusation that they don't have to worry about, but they decide to worry about because you said, we want to be asleep, we don't want to say things that are going to upset people, etc., etc. And having read and heard about this, that I think Rob Pugh, in a article I read this morning or recently from the Wisconsin News, was talking about the fact that after a recent conference in Ohio, they went outside, about 80 of them, and they were outside a big mega church informing these people about abortion and what was going on. And I'm not being rude, but a number of these people did not particularly appreciate that and express that in various hand movements. Yes, Christians seem to behave like this. And then they say, yes, we're pro-life, but they're not getting involved in those issues. And it's a bit, what I think you're saying, what I am saying is that that many people are asleep in the pews. Many people will not accept what is actually going on and do not want to know what's going on. And I come back to this quite deliberately. The Mueller report has revealed that we are right, that those of us over the last couple of years who have been saying this accusation of Trump being meddled by the Russians, no, that's not true. In fact, it's completely the opposite. It's called Hillary Rodham Clinton selling uranium to a Canadian company, partly owned by the Russians, Uranium One. And the fact that Mueller was the person that took the sort of virals, little test tubes of uranium to Moscow. Yes, I said that. We can trace all that. So that's the scandal. The fact that they made the Clinton Foundation made $145 million out of this. That's the scandal. So all of this information is being revealed, and it is a huge shock for so many people when you've got CNN, MSNBC, ABC, all behind Clinton, Clown News Network, and all the rest of them saying it's the Russians, Trump has done this, Trump has done that. And it was Hillary Clinton, as we've thought all along. and all the Marxists behind that, and the fact that all these emails, all of these instructions will end up going all the way up to the White House that was being run then by Barack Hussein Obama. And that's so difficult for people to get their head round, because in your great nation, free speech is under attack, like free speech is under attack here. Even, in many ways, maybe we're further along the line. But that's why your Second Amendment is so important, a right to bear arms against a tyrannical government. And President Trump has just taken the UN regulations in regard to cutting, stamping down on gun control and gun ownership in your country, and has just said, no, we're not going to have that. He knows what's coming down the line. Kevin Shipp, look him up, people. He is just fantastic. And he was talking about this with Greg Hunter, the fact that the president knows what's coming down the line, that you have a right to bear arms, and I think if I can get this quote, I think the verse is Luke 22, verse 33, verse 34. I have the T-shirt. Doesn't make me very popular if I wear it over here, where Jesus says, if you don't have a sword, go out and buy one. He actually says that to his disciples. Now, my T-shirt says, if you don't have an AK-47, go out and buy one. But there we go. So this is why you have your constitution. That's why it's, for the people. It's governed by the people. You are a representative republic that uses democratic means to decide who's going to go in. And the reason why you have the Electoral College is for checks and balances, so that in the end, your country is not run by two cities, which would be Los Angeles and Washington, D.C. And again, Sam, I say it respectfully, I'm not here to teach you a civics lesson or whatever. I'm just saying that I am passionate about what's going on your side of the pond, politically and historically, and that we forget history at its peril. And you have that Electoral College, as I say, for a reason. And people go, well, hold on a minute. In California, Hillary might have won the popular vote. Well, so what? X amount of people live there. There may be smaller people, less people living in a smaller state. That's why you have to have those balances. And then you've got, and here the parallels may be between lambs and lions again, over the total abuse of the executive branch, where, the Constitution has been suspended. And in our film, there's one or two caucuses that are a real pain in the bottom to the president. And Daniel is leading one of those. That now you've got, Elizabeth Warren, I'm confused which native tribe I come from, is now saying, I want to get rid of the Electoral College and all this kind of thing. You've got people that are in Congress and the feature film of Between Lambs and Lions actually talks about this. That's why it's even more of a compliment than we could talk about this. You've just got that complete abuse of your political system. So I believe in 2020 it's going to be, and we've got to be preparing for that now. And I'm saying this because I feel very much part of this fight. And one of the reasons why is because we've just had our own coup in this country. And I can talk about that and explain that now.
Yeah, definitely. I would be remiss if I didn't get someone from London to talk about, world events, especially the London events and Brexit. It would be foolish of me to not go down that. And it was something that I remember when they had that vote, it seems like forever ago now, how it was such a moment. It was like President Trump getting elected and then Brexit coming on. It's like those two stands against the New World Order, very close to each other, was such an interesting time. People are like, I felt so much joy coming out of that, because it felt like people are actually standing up against this. And now here we are, years later, and you're still part of the EU. So can you give us a what's going on? Can you just kind of give us an overview, arching theme of it?
I will do, thank you. And just slightly going back, and again, just touching on your previous question, when we talk about people being awake, the fact that we're now using the term of the deep state. The deep state is a real term, and of course it's been a real term. You could argue definitely since 1913 with the formation of the Federal Reserve System in your country, where it brings about the third or fourth attempt to bring a central bank. I think it was the fourth attempt. So where are we at? Well, we're at the fact that we've exposed our own deep state on this side of the pond, where the 44th president, turns around and says publicly, well, if you vote to leave the EU, you'll go to the back of the queue. He said that privately in a meeting with David Cameron at number 10, and then David Cameron asked him to publicly say that. That did come out in a newspaper article. I've forgotten from which newspaper, but it did come out. So our deep state has been revealed. Our deep state spent £5 or £6 million sending a pamphlet out, which I do have here somewhere, I need to find it, to every single household in this country, going, if we leave the EU, the sky will fall, the Thames will turn red, and it will just be absolutely abominable, and we need to stay within the EU. Just very quickly. 1923, the EU was designed in 1923 fundamentally by two men. Arthur Saltaire, who was a British civil servant, and Jean Monnet. They both had seats on the League of Nations, very simply. Jean Monnet was the main architect. The whole idea of the European Union, but when we joined, it wasn't the European Union, it was the common market. But it would always be about monetary and political union. And the reason why you couldn't explain that in the beginning is because the whole idea was to take the democracy of each individual country that joined step by step, treaty by treaty, but without telling them. You slowly absorb them into the Borg, basically. That is what you then did. But you didn't explain that. So we, after Suez, we had a little bit of a row with you at the time. The then president, I think Eisenhower, said, you didn't explain to us that you were going into Suez. Would you kindly leave? And we lost our nerve. We had lost our empire in 1948. And personally, I believe that is because of the way that we treated the Jewish nation and the formation of Israel in 1948, which I'm very passionate about. Your president then was the first country to recognize within minutes Israel, the state of Israel. It's one of the reasons why I believe that your nation has been blessed, along with other reasons. Now, so jumping ahead to 2016 in regard to the referendum vote. So 17,410,752 people voted with a majority of over few million, I just thought, to leave the EU. It was by 52 to 48%. In fact, the majority was just over 1 million. So we voted to leave. David Cameron resigned. He said that the referendum result would always be a once and for all vote. When we were taken in 1973, jumping back, so let's just parallel the two. When we were taken in by Ted Heath lied. We immediately lost our sovereignty. Immediately. There was a referendum in 1975, and people then voted to remain into what was called the common market. People voted to join the common market. That was how it was pitched. Not eventually that it would be political and monetary union. That was hidden. And that's why I refer to the 1923 comment and planning from day one. It simply. So we're then taken in, which meant that we would have agreed low tariff barriers to trade with the other 6 nations at that time that were members of the common market. But it then morphed into the European Economic Community, and then morphed into the European Union. So 2005, jumping ahead, the French and the Dutch turned down what was called basically the European Constitution. It was repackaged and put forward in 2007. I've always, sometimes on other interviews, I apologise, I've said 2010, but it was in fact 2007. And that was the Lisbon Agreement. And the reason why I say about the repackaging, it's a bit like, as Ireland have found out, the Danes have found out, if we don't like the way that you voted first time, we ask you to go and vote again. Right. And that's the parallels with that, in the fact that now there is this discussion, which is rather disgusting, of us actually having a second referendum. That the people who voted out were ignorant, they were racist, they were bigots, they didn't understand what they were talking about. Well, that's the biggest load of baloney I have ever heard. We did know what we were talking about. Now, the reason why some of the facts, if I had been able to be on the BBC or other mainstream news, I would have explained the fact that we lost our sovereignty in 1973. We lost control of our fishing industry in 1973. There's a very infamous quote in regard to Ted Heath, when someone who was the then Prime Minister, who then said, who was a dear friend of Jean Monnet, one of the architects, who then said, you know, how many people in the fishing industry? And someone said 18,000. He said, that's an insignificant vote. What he didn't realize was all the other little businesses went with that. But more importantly, all the villages and that would die by actually getting rid of the industry. The most important parallel with 1972, just before, and now is this, is that in a very, very good book, which is, I'll try and get it, excuse me, which is this book. It's called The History of Europe and the Great Deception, written by Richard North and Christopher Booker. So in 2016, I made a little film where I filmed Richard North's presentation of how the UK could leave the EU and protect its economy. As soon as we actually voted to leave, in many ways, that became irrelevant. But the key thing is this. In 1972, when various parties were voting, do we stay in, do we stay out, they were remembering people like Hugh Gateskill in 1961 that made a very, very important speech. He turned around and said that if we join the EU, it will be the end of 1,000 years of history, talking about going back to Magna Carta and all this. And of course, Magna Carta, there is codified law that we do have that points to our own constitution. And of course, your constitution is based on our parliament, our constitutional law in regard to Magna Carta, etc. That's how various things have been influenced. And we've taken 350 years to create the kind of parliamentary system that our present government has just thrown away. I'll repeat that our present government has just thrown away. We lost our sovereignty in 1973. We had people going into what we call the division lobbies, which are the areas that members of parliament, not military police, as someone said to me the other day, and members of parliament go into to vote. So they go into what's called the division lobbies. That was all a scam, Sam. In that book, The History of Europe and the Great Deception, they talk about what they call, they have whips. Each party has someone who whips their party in regard to, not literally, but in regard to making sure they go into the right division lobby to vote for the particular party or the government, you know, the opposition or the government policy. And they were basically fiddling this. They were making sure that just enough people were in or just enough people weren't, so that they could give the impression that this was a democratic decision. Because many, many people from across party, as we've found out, were all in on this. The parallels that you have on your side of the pond, it's a bit like when they say Republican in name only. You know, they're not Republicans. They are, in fact, Democrats. Basically, they're, you know, communist, Marxist, progressives who don't believe in the Constitution. So in a nutshell, what is going on? And I suppose I could say the same thing. I wonder what is really going on. Well, the bottom line is that on the 29th of March, we were supposed to have left the EU. Technically, I believe that we have. There is a court case going on by, I think, a gentleman called Tilbrook that says technically we have actually left the EU on the 29th of March, a few weeks ago. Now, that was set in stone. It was legal. The Article 50 that was put in regard to the Lisbon Agreement, which meant that if you put in Article 50, it means that you are giving notice to the European Union for 2 years that you are leaving the European Union. That is what that means. So we did that. Now, what's really interesting, that came about because some lady called Gina Miller was trying to stop us through court cases, and you could argue that the spectre of Mr. George Soros was floating around there, and we get called conspiracy theorists and all this. Well, there's various things that are out in regard to that. Remember the man, as I was reminded today, the man that gave $27 million to the Hillary Clinton campaign and $32 million to the Barack Hussein Obama campaign. Just throw that out. So Gina Miller then meant that Article 50 went in, and it was set in parliamentary statute that we will be leaving on the 29th of March. That's really, really important. A parliamentary statute. As it got closer and closer and closer, the 71% of members of our parliament that are Remainers, they're not Brexiteers, they're Remainers, began to really see over a period of time, and I would say a good year, of how they could orchestrate. And I say that, I don't say it lightly, because now we can see an orchestration of how you can then have a coup, basically, against a democratic decision. It was the highest turnout in recorded history that I know of in regard to the amount of people that actually voted to participate in that vote, whether you were remaining or whether you were leaving. And they have decided to ignore that. Mrs. May, and I think she, along with other, many other MPs, maybe about 410 MPs, who voted to take a no deal off the table, led by an MP called Yvette Cooper and I think Oliver Letwin. What's happened is, and I'll come to Yvette Cooper in a minute, because we've raised the whole thing of truthers, conspiracy, globalism. Let's come back to her in a minute. They then put before Parliament that Parliament will not be able to leave the EU unless it has a deal, which frankly is scandalous. That's not the mandate that people voted for. They voted to leave completely, not be a member of the single market, not be a member of the customs union, which creates the tariffs and who you can trade with. Now, people may say, well, what's the relevance of that? The relevance is that you have 27 countries as member of the European Union, and you only have one person goes and negotiates trade deals on all the other 27 countries' behalf. In other words, we don't have someone from the UK going to negotiate with the EU on our behalf, right? It's one person that actually does that. So this is how much control that is actually going on, and the Parliament, Strasbourg Parliament, in many ways is just a show. You have 26 commissioners that are unelected. So that speaks of socialism. That speaks of Marxism to me. Juncker, who is the present leader of that, unveiled a statue to Karl Marx, gave a wonderful speech. I believe the statue was made in China. I think he made this speech 2 years ago. This is the basis of it. It's undemocratic. And as we have seen since we voted to leave, we've seen people like Vostad, we've seen people like Macron, we've seen Merkel even, going for the fact that we would have to give up more and more of our democracy. And what's fascinating is that those people that voted to remain They voted to remain in an EU that they thought that they can remember. But the EU is not going to be that. It's now going to change because it will have its own EU army and all this kind of thing, and it will demand more and more money from us. Now, if we stay in and we don't get out, according to the Lisbon Agreement, we will have to change our currency from the pound and accept the euro. That's what we will have to do. We will see the fact that we contribute up to £13 billion a year. That will go up. We do get some kind of rebate of maybe £3 to £4 billion of that back. In a nutshell, coming back, where are we at? We are at the fact that it was pushed back to April the 12th when we would leave. That has now been pushed back to the 31st of October. Halloween. Seems to be quite fitting, doesn't it? Unfortunately. Now, the argument is this, is that according to the elites and the powers that be and the Europhiles and what's going on, and the fact that it's stop Brexit at all costs, is that there was a parliamentary statute, I believe, that pushed it back to the April the 12th. But you could argue, where is it that pushes it back to October the 31st? Now, I know my friend Richard North, who wrote the book, History of Europe and the Great Deception, has talked about the fact that when you have these big EU summits and at the end of it they give a press release, they've already decided what that's going to be before the meeting has even started. And as Juncker has said, if you don't get what you want, then you have to ask them to do it again. And if you don't get what you want, then maybe it comes to the fact that you have to start lying. That's out there, all these comments that these people have made. The European Union, as it is morphed into being, let's just say it, is a leg of global governance. It's a leg of global governance. Now, we voted to leave. At the moment, in our own country, Sam, where we are a democracy, which means that first past the post, whoever gets 51% of the votes is the winner, and the other 49%, which is nearly 51%, are the losers, which is different to your system. That's why you've got the checks and balances within the three branches, but why you have got the Electoral College. I come back to that. It's explaining those differences. Our democracy's gone. If we don't leave, and we don't leave without a deal, our democracy is gone. Why is that, Mark? Well, the deal that Mrs. May, this is the important thing, has brought forward to Parliament 3 times to vote on, would only leave us leaving the EU in name only. We would be what we're calling a vassal state, where we're dug out from the inside. It means that we would not have anything to do with being having any seats as commissioners anymore, that we would continue to give millions and millions of pounds, etc., to this body. We would have no power. We would not have left. We are still part of it. Now, this particular deal, just say this. So our civil servants, we are ready to leave the EU. Many civil servants working for government that put in place the fact that we can leave all our in regard to trading, etc., all the apparatics that we need to function as a nation and gain our independence back. Any country that is not in charge of its own money, not in charge of its own laws, and not in charge of its own borders, as you know full well, is not a country anymore. I think the Pope needs to be questioned over the fact that he's just given $500,000 to various caravans that are trying to attack you on your southern border. Let's just say it how it is. Soros does not believe in borders, open society and all this kind of thing. This is what he believes in. We now passionately have our, an ex-prime minister of this country, Tony Blair, again, someone else that maybe, along with 410 MPs and our present prime minister, needs to be in the Tower of London for treason. The parallels are this again, Sam. The discussion is that in regard to the attempted coup against a candidate for president of the United States, being Donald J. Trump, to undermine that as a coup attempt. There are long prison sentences, I think, under the particular article, codified article in your constitution that they have abused. It means that they are either up for a long prison sentence, or that you can even argue that there is a death sentence in regard to that. Treason is very real on your side of the pond. Treason over here, a friend of mine said that when Tony Blair was Prime Minister, he sort of passed some legislation, I think, where MPs may not be able to be done for treason. Let's just throw that out. I have to check that one out, but I believe that that's out there. So Blair has been going on saying to Macron, do whatever you can, to stop us leaving and all this kind of thing. This is an ex-prime minister of this country. Of course he would say that. It's one of his emails, or is mentioned in one of the WikiLeaks emails about in regard to Hillary Rodham Clinton and her discussion with Lynn Rothschild and letting Tony down and not being able to meet at some ski resort and various things. It's all out there. I'm not saying that, making anything up. So what we have is a massive globalist fight. The fight is not between left and right anymore. The fight is between globalism and nationalism. So that is what's going on over here. So you say, where are we at? We are at the fact that the elite within the London bubble, within the freeway of the M25, as we say, are turning around and saying to the rest of the country, no, we're not gonna leave. There are many people within London that voted to leave. They may not talk about that because they might lose their job. They might have their credit card frozen. They might have various other abuse thrown at them, because in 2016, even amongst so-called Christians, some of the abuse on social media because people have voted out was rather very un-Jesus-like. It really, really was, right?
Yeah.
And I like a number of friends on your side of the pond. I lost friends and all this kind of thing, but we are entitled to have an opinion. And the problem is that people don't come to us with facts in a debate. They come with emotions. And the reason why 17,410,752 with a majority of over 1 million voted out is because they would like to be able to run their country again. And our civil service, since 1973, the elites have not wanted to do that. 410 MPs seem profoundly fearful to actually run the country again. Coming back to Yvette Cooper is married to Ed Balls. He at one point was Chancellor of the Exchequer under Gordon Brown. And there was a very sort of wonderful camera bomb by SGT, Sean from SGT, I believe, where they're standing next door to Henry Kissinger, and he's wants to talk about Henry Kissinger's misdemeanors and various things. So these people are there, and people go, well, what are you saying, Mark? Well, what I'm saying is within Parliament, it seems that the Parliament building within Legoland up the road has far more power than our Parliament does, because of all these people mixing with globalists and giving all this power away to a one world government leg. Yeah,
that was wonderfully put, and I appreciate all the historical background and the parallels, and I really appreciate that answer. And it leads me to this question: is, as we wrap up the show today, and as we come to an end, what can people do about it? In London, if you're talking to people from Europe, what can people do to push the government, to stand by what they said they were going to do and exit? And then furthermore, tying it back into the beginning of our interview, is people who are asleep or people who are waking up. What do we do with this information that we talked about today? What is the action steps that we take?
You ask a huge question.
Yeah.
But it's a brilliant question. The fact is, as Christians, we are involved in the biggest spiritual battle of our lifetime. Right, so Ephesians 6 talks about that. We're not fighting against flesh and blood, but principalities and powers. That is where we're at. We are fighting a massive principality, and we have to engage in prayer. We have to inform each other. You and I'm blessed by the fact that I'm having this amazing conversation with you across the pond And I'm very grateful to do that along with other dear friends. We need each other. We need to be praying for you, and you need to be praying for us. 2020 election, the 2016 election of President Trump, I was over the moon about that. Couldn't run down the road and fully express that because of all the stupidity that then came out. And that is being drained. The sewer is slowly being drained. As I say, our swamp and sewer is being revealed. What can we do? Well, we need to be praying about that. And then we need to be making our voices heard in a variety of different ways. And there have been, marches, protests. And it's going to evolve, because the fact is that our Prime Minister is going to try and bring her deal to Parliament 4 times. Now, we need to write to our members of Parliament on this side of the pond, as I have written to mine, who said he's getting 400 emails a day, but can't answer mine personally. If he had actually answered mine personally, then hopefully he needs to read the book, The History of Europe and the Great Deception. He's fully aware of what's going on. 200 odd are fully aware of the deception that has been going on. It is about informing each other, etc. In some ways, on a bad moment, I feel powerless sometimes. We don't have a Second Amendment. I'll just leave it like that. All right. But protests in the future may need to happen in a variety of different ways to get people to wake up. There is discussions about getting rid of Treasonous May, as we call her right now. The 1922 committee are looking at ways to do that, even though she's been given a mandate of being there for another year. Sam, in one sense, it's a simple question, but on the other hand, it's a question that just says they want to wear people out so that people get totally frustrated, they will ignore it, and they just want to get on with their lives. Yes, we need to get on with our lives, but I'm afraid that we cannot, by any stretch of the imagination, let this go.
Well, that's a great answer, and I appreciate that. So as we finish, my last question is, where can people find you? How can they support you? And I know that you have another film coming up shortly. Can you talk about that for a minute?
Yes, thank you. So we have a short film, and that was 22-minute drama about communism. It's called The Iris Echo. And we need to get that on the internet as soon as possible. It's been in 4 film festivals on your side of the pond and a few over here. So as soon as that goes out, then I'll let you know. So wonderfully, watch Between Lambs and Lions, please. Watch it on YouTube, share it, make a comment, get it out there. Yes, it sometimes seems as though it's controlled, but there we go in regard to getting it out there. And there is censorship. The other thing is there is another feature film project that I'm part of called, here we go, Orbiter the Movie, and that is based in Tennessee, which will be a 3D, faith-based film. The amount of censorship that we have had in regard to trying to raise money for that has been, my 2 friends have had particularly, has been unbelievable. So in that note, you could find me on Facebook. I'm not on Twitter yet. I need to sort that out. But you can find me on Facebook. If you share, Sam, if you share my email at the end of that on this, then people could find me and contact me. That would be awesome. And basically just say to people, please pray about Orbiter the Movie. There is a cinema deal. If people want to donate some money towards that, that's great. There is, in fact, an investment opportunity in regard to that, in all seriousness. But we desperately need prayer for that project. But that's where you can find me, sir. And I will be speaking at a conference in Ohio at the end of July, with Dr. Mike Spaulding is heading that up. So yeah.
Yeah, he's a good friend of the Sharpening Reports for sure. So I'm hoping that a lot of my listeners will be there. I might be there. It's kind of close to where I'm at, so I might try to get out there, but we'll see. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on the show. It was an excellent program and an excellent discussion, and I hope to have you back again soon.
Thank you very much, Sam. It was a real privilege to be here, and I look forward to coming back. Thank you.
Absolutely. Guys, again, it goes back to the idea of being creative. Is what are you doing with God's gifts to wake people up? You know, is your gift writing? Is your gift filmmaking? Is your gift just art? Is it drawing? You know, what is your gift? What are you trying and what are you using it for? You know, are you using it to further God's kingdom? Are you using it to wake people up? Because that's what we're called to do, and that's what I want to do. You know, that's why I do the Sharpening Report. You know, that's why I interview certain people on different topics, because they are doing things with their gifts and they're out there changing the world. And we won't win this war. We won't become victors if we don't use the gifts that God gave us. You know, are you going to be the person with 10 talents that doubles it to 20? Are you going to be the person with 1 talent that doesn't do anything with it, that buries it? It's up to you. You have to be active. I know people listening to this program are more active already and more awake than what's going on, so I appreciate you tuning in. Guys, I hope you enjoy the show. I'm not going to ask you to like, subscribe, or share, but, you know, I appreciate it if you do. Hope you enjoyed the show. Hope you have a good week, and I'll see you next week.